Hi, everybody. Rabbi Steve Schwartz here today with you, and our ritual director, Ben Kreshtool. We have Jeremy behind the glass. Jeremy, how are you today? All right. And Ben will have the opportunity to spend a few minutes talking about Parashat Vayechi, which is the last parsha in the book of Genesis.
That's right. I don't know. Are you happy about it? I'm pretty happy about it.
Happy that Genesis is ending.
Yes.
Well, I like Genesis in part because from a rabbinical perspective, it's relatively, it preaches well. Let's say that. It preaches well. But so does the first half of Exodus, so I'm good
think
with that too.
It's messy in Genesis. It's a messy book of the Torah.
Messy in what sense?
I think I've a lot of mess in the family. It's
no
just
doubt.
very messy, and it's not the orderly things that I like in Vayikra, for example.
Well, Vayikra is very orderly.
Yes.
Being a priestly-oriented book, and the priests were very interested in order in general.
True.
But messiness is still happening here at the end of Genesis. So,
significant.
Significant. So you would kind of think that once they've had the whole book to try to reduce some of the messiness.
That's what I think. I mean, it's kind of crazy to me that Jacob in particular sort of never really learns the lesson of favoritism and why it's bad. Right. And you can see that all the way until the very, very end.
Yep.
And it's crazy to me.
So what strikes you about Jacob here in Vayechi?
So I think it's really interesting. The opening of the parasha actually is kind of surprising for two reasons. One we'll get to a little later, I think. But it's, talking about how Jacob's sort of ill, and all he wants to do is see Joseph.
You mean, and not the other sons?
Right, not the other sons. He calls for Joseph, right? And I don't blame him entirely. I mean, the other sons have caused him nothing but grief, let's be honest. I mean, it's been difficult for Jacob. And I think he even says this to Pharaoh, right? When Pharaoh asks him, how old are you? He's like, my years are a lot and have been difficult.
Yeah.
Largely as a result of these other sons. Joseph, though, is not to be excluded from this. He also caused his fair share of tsaras. But all he wants to do is see Joseph. And it's kind of interesting. He's sick in this bed. But then when Joseph comes into the room, immediately comes up from the bed. And then, interesting, it says, Vaishtachu, that he bows to Joseph, which, again, coming back to the dreams, but also kind of weird as well. It's just, this whole that he immediately sends for Joseph, who comes with his own sons. And meanwhile, the rest of the sons who knows where they are. They might not even know. But a messenger's been sent to Joseph. It's just, again, not learning the lesson of the favoritism.
Yeah. Although the sons do show up later.
Eventually. But it's going back to that whole idea, right, that the younger will supersede the older, right? And so they're all come later. And it's not, he won't bless the rest of them until he's blessed Joseph and his sons first.
Right. So along the lines of the younger and the older business, which is a thread that runs through the entire book of Genesis.
Well, for the entire Torah.
For the entire Torah and really Tanakh,
and
actually.
Tanakh, yeah.
But here in Genesis, where it's so prominent,
prominent.
In every generation, it becomes an issue. And there's sort of an interesting twist here. Well, maybe we should say for folks that the younger becoming the older, in other words, the older son should be the one to inherit and take on the mantle of responsibility and the covenantal agreement, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
But each time the older is superseded, we might say, by the younger.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so Joseph is not the youngest, but one of the second youngest of all the brothers, and he becomes the most important. We saw it with Jacob and Esau.
Yes, we
did. You see it in every generation.
And you see it with Ishmael and with
Ishmael and Isaac and
all there.
Okay, so fine. So here there's an interesting kind of twist on that, which is at the beginning of the parsha, and Joseph brings Menashe and Ephraim, and he wants Jacob to bless them, and Jacob begins the blessing, and as we see, he puts his hand that should bestow the blessing on the younger son's head first, and the other hand on the older son. And Joseph tries to stop him.
Right.
And Joseph says, no, Dad, it should be the other way. You should bless the older son. It's just such an interesting comment coming from Joseph, who kind of is in that whole train, right, in that whole history. And he still wants, Joseph's saying, no, don't do it the way you did it with me and my brothers. But Jacob is insistent on it. Yeah.
And so I'm glad you mentioned that because I think there's an interesting sort of verse here. Of course, now I can't find it. Yeah. So this is, again, the linguistic themes that sort of weave themselves through the entire book of Genesis, I think are beautiful, they're masterful, and they teach us sort of a lot. And I think it's a really interesting sort of thing here that in verse 10, it says, Ve'enei Yisrael kavdu mizoken lo yuchal lirot, right? So that the eyes of Jacob were heavy with age and he wasn't able to see, right? And if we go back several parshiot, Jacob's own father, Yitzchak, but it uses similar but different language. And there it says, Vayehi ki zaken Yitzchak v'tichyena einav, right? So it says that that Yitzchak was old, but then his eyes darkened. And I think it's a little different. I think in that sense, I've long believed that Isaac wasn't really physically blind. I think it's really a spiritual blindness.
Yeah.
I think here it's mamish a physical blindness that's happened now, the way it's talking about that he actually, like, lo yuchal lirot, he actually could not see.
Yeah.
But also I think there is an element sort of the same way that he knows that he can see these two lads before him.
He Jacob.
Yeah. And it's also interesting, the language that he uses, even though he's crossed his hands. Who does he bless first? He actually blesses Joseph first, right? He doesn't actually even bless the boys first. He blesses Joseph first. And then he blesses the boys sort of initially simultaneously, vayivarech otam, before he even gets into the individual blessings, right? He blesses them both, right? The lads, right? Vayivarech et hane'arim, it says, which I find also very interesting linguistically, that he's sort of, I think, just covering all the bases, right? First, I must bless Joseph first. That's the thing I think in his mind clearly that he has to do, because again, he thought Joseph was dead, right? For a long time, and this last couple of years of his life, I think, really enriched him greatly to be able to see his favorite son again. But that's like all in his mind, must bless Joseph first, even when blessing his own grandsons, right? Still, Joseph is there, and I think it's, again, crazy.
So let's, and it's worth noting that the language of the blessing that Jacob extends to Menashe and Ephraim becomes part of blessing sort of liturgy that we use today with our children. So in two ways. So
Or you have the sort of the nighttime blessings, right? The Hamalach HaGoel, we say at nighttime after Shema. And then we have the way we bless our sons, Ephraim v'Chimnashe, right? The way we bless, on Friday night, we bless our sons, that they should be like Ephraim and Menashe.
Now, our daughters, we bless using the names of the matriarchs.
Right. It's interesting that we wouldn't use our patriarchs.
Why do you think that is?
I was going to ask you why you thought that was, because it's very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really know either, except that at this point in the Torah, the other sons, Jacob's other sons, have sort of become such a balagan, and Ephraim and Menashe are the ones who are poised to kind of continue the tradition. Maybe there's that, and maybe the Torah is sort of saying, that the patriarchs are just problematic in their stories. I mean, Abraham, not so much, although you could argue even Abraham.
I mean, a little bit.
Isaac's not much. I mean, there's not much to Isaac really in the end. And Jacob is, as you were saying, is really problematic character.
But I think also that our mothers also have their own sorrows too, and I think it's kind of interesting that we bless our daughters like them. But I think you're right. I think that the Torah is trying to tell us that there's going to be a shift now in these two particular boys, the moral quality of their character. And then, of course, Jacob's foresight, right? Jacob is a prophecy, foresight for years down the road to see, what it's going to be. And it's going to be through this type of character that we're going to bless people. And not, like you said, our very problematic forefathers.
I love the midrash on this story of Jacob, because he says, what does he say? Mi Elah.
Yeah, Mi Elah.
It doesn't seem to recognize his grandsons. And, of course, the midrash comes in and says, why didn't he recognize them? Because they looked like they were Egyptians.
Right,
And he
right.
didn't.
Well, Joseph was Egyptian.
Egyptian.
I mean, let's not kid ourselves. I mean, Joseph spent more time in Egypt than he ever did in Israel.
By far.
And I mean, new clothes, new name. Wasn't Joseph? It was Tzafnet Paneh, right? This was not Joseph, right? This was a man who looked Egyptian, and his kids were Egyptian, his wife Egyptian.
And that's what the Midrash gets into with the kids saying, they had Egyptian clothes on, they spoke Egyptian, they spoke with Egyptian accents. And it's just interesting. But then the resolution of the Midrash is Shema Yisrael. Right? Shema Yisrael, understood as, listen, Israel, Jacob, Adonai Eloheinu, our God, and your God, Adonai Echad, is one God.
Sort of like that passphrase.
Yeah.
Right? That sort of unlocks that. I think in later Tanakh, it's Shibolet.
Yeah. But I mean, it's a great Midrashic text. Yeah. And also, it speaks to kind of an underappreciated narrative piece of the Jacob cycle, which is really the Joseph part of the cycle, which is that whole thing of assimilation.
Right.
And what when you're an Israelite or a Jew living in a foreign country, and your children are dressing like people in that country, speaking the language of that country, et cetera, what does it mean to be Jewish? How do you maintain your Judaism?
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that's the thing that I think, the second thing that really strikes me about the parasha is, for all of this Egyptian stuff that's here, the parasha itself is very much about the land of Israel, right? From the very beginning, when Joseph is talking to, when Jacob is talking to Joseph, I mean, it specifically mentions, right, that mi Padan, right, from Padan Aram, back in Israel. And then, don't bury me here, bury me in the land of Israel, right? And then all of the blessings of the later sons all have to do with the land of Israel. It's all, I think, a reminder specifically to these Egyptian children. This is not our homeland. Egypt is not where we're from.
Right.
We are from Israel. We are from here. We're going to go back there. We're going to have to spend some time here, but it's important for us to remember, we're not from here. You have to bury me in the land of my fathers. This is where we are from. The land of Israel is our heritage. And from the very beginning, opening words of the parasha, all the way to the very end, very much about the land of Israel.
Well, yeah, and of course, towards the end, there's the whole piece of taking Jacob back for burial, and this whole train of people going.
That section of verses there is kind of interesting to me. Well, first, I love that when he dies, the brothers all go and they make up the story to Joseph about his. By the way, before he died, he said that you shouldn't be angry at us for that thing we did, even though he never says it. They make up this story because I think they're still a little scared, even though Joseph has been very clear, I think, that nothing bad is going to happen to them. But yeah, this whole, when he dies, first of all, they embalm him, because Egypt, that's what they do in Egypt. They embalm him. But then this entire entourage goes up. Yes. It's the sons, but also it's Joseph, and what I imagine a very significantly large security contingent for. What do you make of that? I think there's two reasons for it. What do you make out of that?
Why does Joseph go?
No, with this large entourage. Usually when we bury our ancestors, and it's always interesting when we do, it's always the family, right? Ishmael comes back to bury Isaac.
Right.
Everybody, and when they go to bury Abraham, they're all come, and it's usually a very small, intimate family gathering. Here, not so. Long retinue of Egyptians coming too.
Well, maybe, partially that whole sort of the family history, that difficult family history, and the moment of brothers throwing Joseph into the pit and selling him into slavery. Although at this point it seems like people have moved beyond it, but as you say, the brothers, it's still on their mind, right? That's why they have to say, "Oh, don't, Father said, be kind to us." And maybe it's still on Joseph's mind as well. I think it is. And so he doesn't want to travel alone in the wilderness with the brothers again. He did it one time, didn't work out too well, So he's saying, okay, I'll come with you. It's important to me to be so that I can honor my father, but I'm not going to travel alone with you. So you should know that I'm protected.
See, that's funny. I think that you put it into the family sense. I see it from Pharaoh's side. I can't let Joseph go all the way back to Israel with all of these people. He might not come back. So first of all, let's not kid ourselves. Joseph, very important, already probably travels with a large retinue anyway in the land of Egypt with security establishment. But to travel to a foreign country with this family, he might get homesick and become welled with emotion and want to stay. Pharaoh can't have that happen. Needs Joseph. So also to remind Joseph, also bury your father, but make sure you come back because you need to be back here because...
Or even to say you will be coming.
Oh, right, you will be coming back.
You will be coming
but
back.
I think from everything the text sort of indicates that Joseph and Pharaoh have a pretty good relationship, so I don't think that he would have. But it's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, for sure. Just a couple of things, because Jeremy's so strict, reminding us of the time. But one is, it's always been kind of a moving thing to me that just before Joseph is blessed by Jacob, Jacob goes through this very brief sort of series of memories. He's reflecting back on his life, and he knows his life is towards its end, and he really chiefly remembers two things. One is that he had an experience with God, and the other is that he buried his beloved along the way. So just like what you think about, what you reflect on when you know that the end of your life is drawing near, and what are the things that stay with you? It's always been a moving passage to me. But then the other thing is this whole blessing business, which makes up really most of the parsha, and again, blessing, we would say.
Right. Well, so that's what has always struck me as very interesting is the blessings that he chooses to give are sort of double-edged, right? On one side, it is kind of a blessing, but on the other side, it's also a rebuke for many of the tribes there, because again, they've caused him nothing but sorrows, these boys, for pretty much his entire life.
Right.
And but he also, I think it's interesting that he feels compelled to bless them anyway, despite all of the tsaras, that he feels it is his duty to bless them and sort of, I think, set them on the path that God wants for them, right? Because these blessings also are sort of quasi-prophecy as well, that we kind of looking along down the road,
right.
if we understand from rabbinic commentary. That Jacob still feels compelled, despite the tsaras, to bless them. But if you read them closely, you sort of see, yes, you're going to get this blessing, but also at this last minute, I'm going to give you one final rebuke for the pain you've caused me over all the years.
Yeah,
and it's messy, like I said. The book of Genesis ends kind of messy, Although it is kind of interesting that the beginning of the parasha is Jacob's insistence on being buried in the land of Israel. But the last line of the parasha here in the book of Genesis is that Joseph dies and he was bombed and they placed him in a coffin b'Mitzrayim. Right? Yes. Even though Joseph made a similar request to everyone that you have to take up my bones from here and bring them back, but it wasn't immediate like it was for Jacob.
Not till the time of Moses.
Right, not until the time of the Exodus that it's going to be some fascinating midrashim about that too. And if I'm back for that, we can talk about it. But it's an interesting sort of way to end the book there.
Well, I think partially, it's an intentional composition piece in the sense of the author. It's like when you do radio, and you're going to commercial, you always say, and after commercial, we'll be talking about bum, 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 bum. So here, the Torah, the same thing. Like, you should know, Genesis is ending, but now we're going to go on to Egypt and all the stories that have to do with Egypt. So we'll be on to that next week.
Sure.
I want to thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. I know
Pleasure.
It's not usual. It's
Pleasure
great for me to talk about the parasha.
Jeremy, terrific work as always. And thanks, everyone, for listening.